Shawn Pomrenke's $800,000 dredge was built for one thing: pulling gold, nothing more. But during what should have been a routine night run, the Myrtle Irene struck something unexpected. The sonar lit up with a strange signal, and when the buckets surfaced, they carried up material the crew had never seen before. Within minutes, the deck was buzzing with activity. This wasn't your average pay dirt. It was something foreign, something that didn't belong at the bottom of the Bering Sea. The crew acted fast, separating the strange find from the rest of the load. No one knew if it was a lucky break or a serious problem. Either way, it was clear this moment could change the course of the entire season. This wasn't part of the plan, but in Nome, you don't argue with the sea. You take what it gives, good or bad. And the Bering Sea? It doesn't forgive mistakes. That night, one risky discovery could either save or destroy Shawn Pomrenke's entire operation. Before we dive into what happens next, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe. You're going to want to stick around, because what's coming will have you on the edge of your seat. The numbers didn't lie. They filled Shawn Pomrenke's worn ledger like a slow-moving disaster. 2 weeks. That's all he had before the next round of payments came due. Overdue claim fees, mounting debts, and high-interest contracts that waited for no one. Miss a single payment, and everything he'd built would start to unravel. Payroll, fuel suppliers, parts, shipments, it was all hanging by a thread. To the outside world, Shaw was still Mr. Gold, the confident dredge captain whose name was synonymous with Nome's riches. But behind the swagger, every flake of gold was already spoken for before it even hit the sluice box. It was all consumed by the massive cost of keeping the Christine Rose afloat, feeding the crew, and patching together aging machinery held together more by determination than metal. The season was slipping through his fingers. In just a few weeks, violent storms would hammer the coast, and ice would begin creeping across the shoreline. When that happened, the gold-rich seafloor would be untouchable until spring. Shaw could feel the pressure mounting with every sharp gust of salty wind. The Christine Rose, reliable but aging, just couldn't keep up anymore. Not at the scale he needed, not with how deep in the hole he already was. And that's when a dangerous idea took root. A dredge bigger than anything he'd ever operated. Forgotten. Left to rot. Written off as scrap. But if he could bring it back to life, it could process more gold in a single tide than the Christine Rose could in a week. It was risky, crazy even. But those were the kinds of bets that had built Shaw's reputation. The Myrtle Irene sat slumped on the shoreline, her massive frame half swallowed by sand, as if trying to disappear. Salt had eaten deep into her hull, leaving scars like battle wounds. Rust streaked down her sides like dried blood. Her name was barely visible under layers of peeling paint. Most people saw a wreck, a corpse of a vessel that hadn't run in years. Locals shook their heads as they passed her. "Scrap her," they'd say. "She'll take you down with her." They remembered past seasons, how she burned through fuel faster than she pulled up gold, how her unstable decks nearly tossed operators into the freezing sea. Too big, too clumsy, too far gone. Shaw said nothing as he walked the length of her. The boards creaked beneath his boots, but he didn't see a coffin. He saw a chance. Shaw didn't see a derelict vessel. He saw a war machine waiting to rise again. In his mind, he stripped her down, reimagining every system, piece by piece. The wash plant would be repositioned, the sluice redesigned, the pumps ripped out and replaced. He could almost hear her engines roaring back to life, picture her cutting through the sea like a predator on the hunt. But vision is easy. Execution meant betting everything he had. So he did. He emptied his savings, maxed out every credit card, and signed his name to high-interest loans that would crush him if the gamble didn't pay off. By the time the deals were inked, $800,000 was tied up in a rusting hulk that might never float again. If the Myrtle Irene went under, she'd take more than just his money. She'd drag down his title, his fleet, and the legacy he'd built in Nome. Step 1 was resurrection, and the sea wasn't about to make it easy. Steel came first. Under biting winds, crews tore off rotted hull plates the size of pickup trucks, replacing them with fresh sheets of gleaming steel. Sparks flew into the sand as welders sealed her up, line by line. Every plate was a lifeline, and everyone carried a cost. Shaw didn't have the luxury of waiting. He paid. Next was the wash plant. The Myrtle's original design had been a nightmare. Excavator arms swinging blind, dropping buckets of pay dirt into the sea instead of the hopper. Shaw tore it down and rebuilt the whole system lower, giving operators a clear line of sight. No more guesswork, just precision. Then he added something the old Myrtle never had: a second sluice line running parallel to the first. Not to catch nuggets, but to grab the tiny flakes of gold most rigs let slide away. In a season where every grain counted, that addition alone could be the difference between keeping the lights on and going under. Then came the guts. Pumps, hoses, generators. Anything with a bearing or a seal was stripped, rebuilt, or replaced outright. In the Bering Sea, a $10 hose failure could cost you $50,000 in lost time. Good enough wasn't good enough. The crew worked around the clock, their shifts bleeding together into a blur. There was no real day or night anymore. Rain sliced sideways through the air, soaking through gloves and jackets. Cold bit down to the bone, turning hands numb on freezing steel, but no one stopped. The flicker of torchlight danced against the Myrtle's rising frame. Every hour cost more than Shaw wanted to think about, but he didn't stop. Couldn't. Not with the season slipping away, and not with $800,000 strapped to a machine that had to work, or wreck him trying. In the back of his mind, he knew the moment they pushed her back into the water would change everything. And when that night finally came, he felt it in his bones. Midnight over the Bering Sea doesn't bring peace, it sharpens everything. The sky hung heavy and black, the air damp and cold, beating on the railings, whispering threats in the stillness below. No one said a word as they eased the Myrtle Irene into the water. There was no champagne toast, no camera flash. This wasn't a celebration. It was an act of survival. Everyone on board felt it. If this failed, it wouldn't just be the dredge that went down. It could be all of them. Piece by piece, through months of brutal labor, they had rebuilt her. And now she was headed not for an easy run, but a known danger zone. A legendary patch of seabed Shaw had heard whispers about for years. A deep hole, more than 30 feet down, where pressure crushed lesser rigs. If the gold was still there, it would be locked tight under thick clay, too stubborn for shallow machines to reach. If it was gone, the Myrtle would burn through fuel and steel for nothing. Shaw stood near the bow, gripping the railing so tight his knuckles went white. His eyes scanned a horizon, long swallowed by darkness. This was the turning point. And nothing, least of all Shaw, was ready for what came next. The crane swung the excavator bucket out over the dark water, its metal teeth catching the light before vanishing into the deep. The splash was lost to the wind, replaced by the steady churn of pumps and the hiss of hydraulic lines coming to life. The dredge trembled, not from failure, but from the weight of work beginning. Time passed slowly, marked not by clocks, but by empty coffee mugs and the muted clatter of machinery echoing from deep within the hull. The crew worked in near silence, eyes fixed on gauges and controls, listening for the telltale signs of trouble. A hiss, a squeal, something slipping out of place. But none came. The belts stayed true. The hoses held firm. The engines growled low and steady, like something ancient that still remembered how to do its job. For a vessel on her first outing since being resurrected, the Myrtle Irene moved with eerie confidence. In the Bering Sea, machines had a habit of failing early, and catastrophically. But tonight, she felt right. Even Shaw, no stranger to mechanical betrayal, allowed himself a deep, steady breath. Then, after long hours, the first sign of life from the seabed appeared. Not gold, but clay. Heavy, wet slabs of it, the kind that clings to gold like frost to glass. The excavator dropped it in thick piles across the deck. The crew's attention sharpened. This was the kind of mess they wanted. This was the stuff that hid treasure. Shaw started pacing, restless. He always did when the stakes were high. His boots echoed softly across the deck as he scanned the noise for anything unusual, something grinding, something whining, anything out of place. Every rattle became a warning in his mind. Then a voice rose from the sluice box, calm but unmistakably alert. "Hey, look at this." Heads snapped toward the sluice. Under the glow of the deck lights, in the slow roll of water, it sparkled. Not just gold dust, but sharp, solid specks. The kind you could pick up and feel the weight of. Gold. Real gold. And the sluice was holding it. Really holding it. The redesign, the untested upgrade, was working. It wasn't flushing the gold back into the sea like so many rigs had before. For the first time in weeks, Shaw's body eased slightly. His shoulders dropped. He didn't smile, he wasn't the type, but his jaw relaxed. Around him, the crew gave quiet signs of relief. A nod, a backslap. Not cheers, just the small, silent acknowledgements that pass for celebration out here. No one said it out loud, but the feeling passed between them. Maybe this gamble wasn't suicide after all, but nothing comes free in the Bering Sea. The Myrtle Irene was hungry. Diesel vanished faster than they liked, gallons disappearing to the steady thump of the engines. Thousands of dollars in fuel, gone each day. The numbers were stacking up, and fast. The gold might be flowing, but the costs were keeping pace. The sea didn't care about profit. It demanded its due in fuel, metal, and grit. Saltwater made its move within days. Fresh welds started blooming with rust in the corners no one could quite reach. Electronics that worked fine on land started sweating inside their sealed casings. Thick, reinforced hoses groaned under the grind of sand and gravel, their outer layers slowly stripped away where they bent and flexed. Every failure had a cost, not just in dollars, but in time. And in the Bering Sea, lost time could be just as deadly as a busted engine. Crew wages, insurance premiums, groceries, spare parts, everything burned money like a bonfire. Every unproductive day nudged them closer to the edge, where even gold wouldn't be enough to pull them back. Shaw understood the math better than anyone. This wasn't just about chasing gold. This was a race against going broke. The Myrtle Irene had potential. She could be everything Shaw imagined. The gold could flow. The systems could hold. But none of that would matter if they couldn't outrun the crushing costs. Out there, drifting beneath a sky stripped of stars, Shaw knew one thing with absolute clarity. It wasn't just the dredge that was at risk of going under. That fear didn't belong to him alone. Every pan of concentrate, every tiny glint caught in the sluice was a reminder of how far they still had to go, and how little time the season would give them to get there. The Myrtle's slow but steady trickle of gold was just enough to keep morale from crumbling completely. But the numbers didn't lie. What they were pulling up wasn't enough. Not nearly. Shaw's debts were piling up faster than the sluice could catch flakes, and every man on board felt it, without anyone needing to say a word. They needed a breakthrough, not a steady yield, a jackpot. A hit big enough to flip weeks of scraping by into a single day of salvation. Shaw didn't sit on that thought. He acted. He ordered a shift, steering the Myrtle away from the safer, proven zones and toward an untouched stretch of seabed no one had mined in living memory. The charts called it dead ground. But Shaw trusted something deeper than maps, an instinct shaped by decades of reading the sea, of following the clues hidden in current, sediment, and silence. It was a long shot that could either save or sink the season. The hours blurred into a brutal rhythm. 18 hours on, a few stolen hours off, then back to it. Sleep became a memory. Meals were eaten half cold between runs. The crew pushed forward on grit, caffeine, and pure willpower. Old sonar maps and barely readable charts hinted at something, some buried layer of gold-rich clay beneath the silt. Finding it was like chasing a ghost. You couldn't see it, not right away. But if you were right, you'd feel it in the drag of the bucket before you saw it sparkle in the sluice. Shaw stood silently, watching the excavator at work, listening. Every groan of metal, every pump's pulse became a message from the deep. The further they dug, the more convinced he became. This is where the Myrtle belonged. And then the ocean answered. Not gently, not quietly, but with force. A storm rolled in. Not just rough weather, this was chaos. Waves roared, the seafloor stirred like a spoon through stew, churning sand, rocks, and, if they were lucky, gold. Most other boats in range made the smart call. Head for port, get clear, play it safe. But Shawn Pomrenke hadn't come this far to play it safe. He gave the order, stay the course, straight into the storm. Waves pounded the bow, salt spray covered every inch of exposed metal. The crew tied themselves down at their stations, fully aware that a single misstep could throw a man overboard in seconds. Shouting was useless. Words were stolen by the wind before they left your mouth. And then, amid the chaos, the numbers started to change. Sensors tracking slurry density lit up. The dredge pumps began to labor under heavier loads, thick, dense material replacing the usual light silt. Shaw's eyes locked on the data. A grin spread across his face. This was it. The storm wasn't a curse. It was a blessing in disguise. It had scraped away the useless top layers and exposed what lay buried beneath. For the next 24 hours, no one left their post. The sluice thundered as it processed a torrent of gold-laden clay. Each shovelful that hit the deck came up heavier, sticking to boots, gloves, and steel like it wanted to stay in the ocean. They pushed the Myrtle harder than they ever had, running the wash plant non-stop, chasing the strike with everything they had. By the time the sea calmed and the wind lost its edge, the crew was spent, physically shattered. But in their exhaustion, they knew. This might have been the moment they'd been waiting for. Their faces were raw, burned by salt, and battered by wind. Every movement came with a tremble of overworked muscles. But then came the cleanup, and it was a sight that would stay with them forever. Pan after pan revealed the truth. Ounces of gold, thick, heavy, real gold. More than they'd pulled all season. It shimmered under the deck lights in fat flakes and solid chunks. The kind of gold you don't just see. You feel it land in your hand with weight and meaning. When they finally tallied the haul, it was enough to wipe out weeks of slow losses in a single run. The Myrtle had taken a pounding, but she'd paid it back in full. And Shaw knew it wasn't luck. It was instinct. If there was one pocket like this out there, there had to be more. But in the Bering Sea, a strike was never just about gold. It was leverage. The kind of leverage you needed when men in suits were circling, ready to decide your fate in warm, distant boardrooms. The corporate deal had started simple enough. A handshake in an office with leather chairs and coffee served in porcelain cups. Promises flowed like conversation, easy, smooth, and seemingly endless. But it didn't take long for the tone to change. Soon, Shaw was signing papers he didn't fully trust. The kind of contracts that sounded harmless, until a lawyer weaponized them. The dream of building a mega dredge, a monstrous machine that could clear more seabed in a week than most crews in a season, had been his vision for total domination in Nome. Investors praised him, called him a pioneer, a visionary. Then they started tightening their grip. First, it was small things, spending approvals, oversight on orders. Before long, Shaw needed permission just to replace parts on his own project. Then came the bank calls, frozen accounts, delayed payments. Progress on the Myrtle Irene stalled, right in the middle of her rebuild. Pieces of her sat scattered in the Nome yard, silent, gutted, and as helpless as a beached whale. By the time Shaw realized what was happening, the bankruptcy paperwork was already in motion. But this wasn't about a failed business. The books showed profit in the millions. This was a takedown, deliberate and calculated. A surgical kill, where the scavengers weren't feeding on failure, but on something still very much alive. When the dust settled and the legal signatures dried, Shaw stood on the dock staring at a dredge he no longer owned. The sea hadn't beaten him this time. It was boardroom predators that did the damage. His future, millions in potential gold, washed away under the weight of legal strategy. Around Nome, the whispers started. It had been the plan all along. a setup. A baited partnership designed to bleed him dry and strip him of everything. Shaw didn't waste energy denying it. He'd learned the hard way. The most dangerous predators don't wear wetsuits. They wear tailored suits. The aftermath crept into every corner of his life. Legal battles, DUI charges, missed court dates, all piling up like driftwood after a storm surge. The stress from the betrayal lit a slow fuse inside him. Tension with his father, already strained from years of clashing visions, exploded into open conflict. Old debts, past deals, everything became ammunition. Wounds reopened that had barely healed. The crew noticed the shift. They were used to Shaw being sharp, but this was different. This was volatile, explosive. A missed bolt on the sluice sparked screaming matches. A late fuel delivery became a threat to dock someone's pay. Friends who had stood beside him for years started stepping back. No one wanted to get pulled under by someone caught in his own storm. Even family ties began to fray. The very thing mining had once brought together was now unraveling, thread by thread. Out on the Bering, where the sea stretches forever, Shaw's world was tightening like a noose. But for all the loss, for all the cracks showing through, some things remained true. Shaw's name was still carved into Nome's mining history. His claims, prime, untapped stretches of gold-rich seabed, were still his. And the Myrtle Irene, once a joke at the docks, was now a machine spoken of with equal parts fear and respect. Competitors knew, if the Myrtle was running at full speed, she could strip a hot zone clean before anyone else even dropped anchor. Every new season was a fight, not just against the sea, but against paperwork, politics, and the clock. Shaw understood the game better than anyone. Mining here wasn't just about finding gold. It was about surviving long enough to bring it to the surface. For him, the gamble never ended. Every choice was a risk. Every storm a test of how much one man could take before he broke. If the sea didn't get him, the world on shore just might. And if a miracle ever came, it wouldn't arrive with headlines or fanfare. It would come quietly, in the shimmer of gold dust sliding down a sluice, or the subtle tilt of a scale reading heavier than expected. That was the reward, the validation. As long as Myrtle's engines turned and the pumps kept roaring, Shawn Pomrenke would be out there, betting against the odds, chasing that one perfect strike that could still change everything in a single tide.